When I first read Underwater, I think the thing that amazed me the most was how fast I read it. It just hit me on so many primal levels.
Building of tension and sense of peril and stifling claustrophobia was achieved very realistically. It was awful. Honestly, I was scared most of the time.
We just started going through the script and finding cool moments and breaking those down, and I started drawing pictures as to like how do we take some of the things in the script and start finding these big moments.
As a director, you're always trying to channel kind of those things that excite you about it. I mean, if you just Google deep sea creatures and things, there's no horror movie that could sum up how intense this stuff is down there. I literally went in with a bunch of real things and was like, even if we put a fraction of this in the movie, it's gonna be terrifying.
That's great. Brad, you need to see that again? That's good.
I began as a cinematographer and I had done some underwater shooting. It's so insane how slow it moves. Shooting Dry for Wet, I knew right out the gate was something we wanted to do, just so we could really play in the world and find the scariest things and the most intense things without really worrying about the logistics. From there, I basically put a plan together to do a test for Fox and Chernin, showing them how I thought we could pull this off.
It was a one-day shoot with a couple weeks of prep, and then it was like a 5-week post-production period where MPC and our visual effects supervisor and producer were working to get the water effects really proper.
In that pitch, there was a lot of aspect that we found very interesting and then everyone liked, kind of the silt aspect and kind of some of the murkiness, the dark, the color palette, everything was established in that pitch. And there were things that we didn't like. That Will said, like, it's a little bit too zero gravity. There was some of the cable work where it felt like it was more on the moon than underwater, which is something that then Will wanted that to be more grounded. And that's why the suits are way heavier.
We were doing crazy things, like we were hanging pipes and using cables to have people walk down the pipes. We didn't end up using all those techniques, but I was able to actually show that to Fox and go, hey, we can do this. We can make an underwater movie without water.
There's so much design work involved in this movie, and there's so much tech R&D. So we started with concept art, concept design, both for the monsters, obviously, but also for the station and completely for the world.
Starting underwater, the prep was pretty tricky in a sense that we knew we weren't really going to shoot a lot of it underwater. So we needed to find a location that could support, multiple stages and a pretty aggressive shooting schedule for how technical it was going to be. And then ended up down in New Orleans in Chalmette, where we found an old Lowe's that had been destroyed by the hurricane. So it was totally empty and just this massive, massive space. And we literally built stages there just to actually facilitate what we were going to try to do technically. We got Naaman Marshall, a production designer, really, really brilliant guy. And we just started dreaming, studying a lot of underwater stuff, but just dreaming the most simple, poignant ideas of what we wanted to build and capture.
What we're going to do is we're going to take this end section here, and we're going to put that
on the inside.
The underwater, bottom of the ocean, dark, scary, heavy, grounded world. I didn't feel I had been done, so it was exciting also to know that the way we were trying to approach it was different with the whole Dry for Wet and CG water and all of that was exciting for me.
Naaman and I would sit and we'd look through art and we'd explore everything from video games we love to types of architecture. And then envisioning the culture that would build this kind of massive stuff underwater and how would they be proud of it and how old does it look. And I love getting into those worlds and imagining that stuff because it sort of begins to thicken up the world and give it more life.
I would have my set designer design the set and he would design it on a computer. Then we would hand that to one of our illustrators who also worked well in VR. And he would put that into a gaming engine, create essentially a video game based on my set designs. And then what we could do is put the VR goggles on and we could actually stand in our space with the right height, the right dressing. feel the distance between stuff, drop the ceiling a little bit lower if we needed to, or if I was in there and bumping my head, I knew it had to go up a little bit. So we were able really to play in these spaces. You know, Will would come in, put the headsets on and be like, yeah, can we push that out a little bit? Can we bring this in here? Can you make that glass? Can you turn the lights on? We'd have the lights turned on in there. And it was really helpful for everybody to get into it.
Anything that underwater is usually the size of like submarine rooms, and they're so tiny, like in real life. And creating sets that were practical to shoot in with the people in their suits, making all the sets work, as well as having water involved in the sets and making that all practical, and having working elevators and having working doors and having, you know, the sets almost get completely submerged, some of them.
The idea was to create something that we felt like we could get lost in. And just by, you know, creating the different corridors and then trying to figure out, well, if we go to that one, what happens after that? And, you know, ultimately on a movie like this, you don't have time to build something for every scene, nor do you have the money. So it becomes a trickery of changing sets over.
The challenge is, you know, bringing everybody together, set, deck, construction, lighting, art department, and, you know, creating this whole world 2 or 3 times within this one particular set.
Not only did our sets have to function as hallways and suit rooms and control rooms and pod rooms for Kepler, and then reused and totally redesigned, repainted, restructured, and function as hallways, suit rooms, moon pool rooms for Roebuck. But then additionally, most of our sets either rock or get flooded or shake or sparks fly or there's a fire or maybe all of those things.
The sets are beautiful. The first day I came here, I was blown away. And there's this really nice running motif throughout the film of these wall sculptures, which are about like Poseidon and Greek mythology. And it has this sort of religious theme to it, which is interesting. Man versus nature, man versus God. Has man overstepped his place in the world?
I think we're maybe right above the drill. So maybe
You've decided to put yourself in this position, and it is the worst possible outcome in exchange for something that benefits you, like oil or money or whatever, like whatever thing makes you go down there, it comes back to bite you.
And the idea when Will and I first started talking about it was having this place feel a bit timeless, where we don't know where we're at. You know, we've always treated this film like an ambiguous future.
It's kind of a mix of new technology and old technology. And so you get this kind of sense where you don't actually even know what time period you're in. You're like, wait, is this the future? Is this the past? Is this an alternate universe? You don't really know. That kind of stuff to me is visually fascinating. And, you know, and story-wise, I think it's fascinating.
We walk. We what?
I don't even have a suit.
The control room started out as just this really claustrophobic space that we wanted super cramped, lots of monitors. I think we had over 60 monitors in the set, and the set was no bigger than, you know, 16 by 20. Super low ceilings, trying to get everything in frame. And then right in the center, we put a light box that everybody could congregate around. It was just that moment where we actually meet everybody in the same room, and we're kind of be able to get to know the characters within that moment.
They built these incredible sets that look so real. It's so detailed, it's so real. This set moves, so it rocks and jerks around. It's kind of its own rig with hydraulics, and then there's another set that does that, and that's really helpful because you really do feel like explosions are happening and you're, you know, in that situation.
Hey, Nora? Hey. The ultimate goal is for 6 actors to get in suits, underwater deep diving suits, and, you know, head to the bottom of the ocean, travel across the bottom of the ocean to another station where they think they can find pods and safely evacuate to the top. So the start of really the journey there starts in here. This room is designed to not only carry the weight of the suits and create, you know, like the work environment where you work on your suits and you maintain your suits. This whole room can be flooded with water, and these drains all drain offset. And they can pump water in and out of this thing.
It was important that we had the bones of the structure in, and what we were playing off of was like the Hoover Dam operation, where, you know, when Hoover Dam was built, it had a lot of time put into the architecture and the infrastructure, and, you know, the arts were super involved. So we were able to play with that a bit, you know, with murals and sculptures. So we start with a bead foam, like your typical styrofoam. And we have a sculptor then cut and shape all of this, you know, by hand. And so, you know, all of this, the face on here, the hands and all of that are actually sculpted. And then what we do on top of that is we hard coat it whatever the finish we want it to be. For instance, Shane's doing sandstone at the moment, so he's laying in plaster on top of this and then shooting sand into it. The inspiration behind these is just the gods handing over the ocean to the humans, and then also pulling in kind of the industrial age of when this was built. The moon pool wanted to feel much like a bathhouse, and we always had the idea of the dome ceiling lit with the center hub structure and the elevator heading down in, being able to walk into it and have water flooded all the way up to the top and having the reflections of all of that.
We have here Nora Price's Hero Dry for Wet underwater suit. It's meant to be shot in a dry sound stage on a sandy floor, and then the visual effects department will later put in the reflective highlights of the glass reinforced dome, as well as all of the water atmosphere, the mulch, sand, and plankton and stuff that's supposed to be flying around them in the set to make it look like they're actually underwater.
Suits are awesome. I considered them the first cast member of the movie, and my friend Jared Purrington and I had drawn them up. We sort of designed based off of games and, you know, anime that we love, and just things that we love, chunky, cool design.
They are based on the kind of rigid shell construction, sort of exoskeleton type construction. Several aquatic suits have also been made that are largely wearable submarines with your arms coming through flexible elements so that you can operate and manipulate tools on the ocean floor. So we kind of did a best of all of those suit elements that are kind of easily accessible to the audience, so that when they see the suit, they kind of get it right away. Starting from the original design, all the parts were 3D printed. Those parts were then cleaned up and what we call body shopped. Then we make a mold of that, and working out of that mold, we can produce as many of the various costumes as we need to.
One of my favorite parts about what I do is dealing with the guys that actually take my inspiration, my drawings, my ideas, and actually make it. There's nothing that I come up with that these guys will not figure out a solution for.
We have an entire warehouse for set deck and millwork and metalwork. We have this giant warehouse that's been subdivided into 3 stages, an additional mill, and then some exterior sets as well. So we have an enormously huge production with a lot of different parts functioning. And the thing that's been great is that we're all more or less in this one, you know, sort of half square mile radius.
Over here is like our construction mill, where we pre-build walls and we, you know, cabinets, and the idea is that we construct all the fiddly bits here and then we pull them onto stage. Over here you've got the whole spray, you know, paint booth. Everything from the mill comes into here, and we have the painters run it all through here.
His paint guys were so unbelievable. His molding guys, it's just the people that Naaman is, you know, knows from so many years in the business. Karen Frick, who was his set decorator, she just blew my mind. Every time I'd walk onto a set that already looked cool because Naaman had built it all up, and then suddenly there's stuff in it. It was amazing.
In my mill, I have it broken out. It's a lot like the military. There's the construction department, which then feeds over to the paint department, and the welding department, and the plaster department, and the mold department. And all of them together are talking amongst themselves on how to get to that final goal. It's the machine. And I always tell my department, once you get the machine going, you have to feed it. And if you don't feed it, we're gonna fail.
Got it.
On the Dry for Wet stage, just as you were building and dressing the sets, you had to think like you were underwater. Some of our pipes, had some sort of buoyancy, so we'd hang them and puppeteer them from the ceiling and have stuff to walk by that had like slow movement.
In order to design all of this, the key elements were, one, it has to function in such a way so that you would viably believe that this is the underwater exterior of something like an oil platform.
We started on the exterior Kepler platform, the earliest. It involves all the metalwork, and it's the most significant structure in the space. We kind of established what that footprint was going to be and dug into that, and also we're covering the whole stage with seafloor and kind of arriving at what that finish would be in terms of the sand and the materials and stuff like that.
We played with, some super big barnacles and mussel type stuff that we would cast out and plant on pieces. Just playing with the sand and the way we get the sand to move across, like a desert. Keeping in mind that then visual effects would come on top of us and they'd, make the sand actually shift and move and put the layers of water and the atmosphere between, us and the set pieces. So we could kind of choreograph and create the playground on a Dry for Wet set.
The most unexpected was probably the rock garden in the bottom of the ocean that on camera just looks spectacular and is kind of very mundane when you're just looking at it, but as soon as you light it and make it dark, and it just came alive and became scary.
I actually, on this movie, started doing night dives like right before we got going into production and came out here to New Orleans. But you're just standing there on the boat looking at this black water, and all you have is a flashlight, and you're just thinking, there could be anything down there. There could be a shark, there could be like a giant squid, you never know. And so it's that fear of the unknown that always drives in my sort of head a good story and a fun movie and something that's exciting to watch. And so Underwater has just been begging to be sort of turned into a movie for the longest time. We're shooting a movie at the bottom of the ocean, but we're not really at the bottom of the ocean. So we're using a lot of technologies to get there, a lot of techniques, both low tech, high tech, visual effects, digital effects, special effects. Basically, if you can think of an effect, we're probably using it to some degree.
A lot of stuff that we did was super practical. It was fun. It was like not hard to do the movie in terms of trying to fantasize and play pretend. It was hard to do the movie because it was scary and it was like genuine. They made a lot of these things happen. We blew a lot of stuff up.
Matthew Dunn, our first AD, and Will realized that the best way to make this movie was going to be to shoot it in chronological order, to shoot it in scene order. And the great thing about that is that it's enabled us to plant things in scenes that we hadn't necessarily even thought of from either a character standpoint or performance standpoint. Piece of set deck that we really liked, and then to have it reappear later.
I think the greatest challenge that maybe we didn't expect that we met on this film and worked through was the suits. It's like they were so heavy. And it's just a testament to how our cast were gladiators, because I directed part of a day in one of them, and it was just like, I just had sweat just dripping down my face. And the suits weighed almost 100 pounds each. And a lot of scenes are free and they're not cabled up. And they were just, you could tell they were in such pain holding these things.
I weigh 125. The suit weighs 83, 85. An average film day is 12 to 13 hours. This is the hardest shoot I will ever do in my life.
Of course, she could swim, but then it got pretty rough for her after that. I mean, the suits are so difficult to maneuver. You're sweating so much, and it's stinging your eyes, and you can't reach your own face. And so as far as my character goes, it's just TJ in one of these suits trying to make it through the movie.
100-pound suit that takes like 20 minutes to get out of once you decide you can't take it anymore. You're like, I'm tapping out. You're like, cool, 30 minutes later, you're like actually walking around again. It was impossible to regulate your body temperature. It was impossible to move, go anywhere. Like there was just nothing, especially like trying to take direction and make a scene better when the direction is like, do you think you can do it any faster? You're like, honestly, absolutely not. I would do anything to move faster. I cannot.
It was a challenge shooting in them because, you know, after a couple days we started realizing like, okay, there are limitations to this. We can't spend too long in them. And you literally really can't do much in them. Like you feel very, very helpless wearing one. The first day that I put one on, I was pretty early on in the shoot. It was like back in March, like 2 months ago, and my first thought was I'm not going to be able to finish the movie. I can't do this, you know. And then we all bonded and realized that we were all feeling that way, and we had to figure out ways to kind of tough it out. And so there was a lot of improvisation on set of just figuring out how we were going to be able to muscle through wearing these things. But then when you see a shot on the monitor, you see Kristen Stewart treading through the water in this thing, and it looks so amazing and it's so striking. You look at that and you think, oh, okay, I have to tough it out, because if it looks that cool, then it's going to be worth it to see it, you know, up on a big screen one day.
Let me see. Go ahead and let me take a look on camera.
One of the things that has been pretty incredible is to watch Kristen, TJ, Vincent, the entire cast really rise to the occasion and go, we signed up for this. We knew what it was. We tested the suits. We all knew. And so here we are. And the truth is that every time that we showed anything to any of the actors or any of the crew on set, hey guys, we cut this little scene together, look at this sizzle, it looked so awesome that it kind of gave everybody the energy to continue.
When she's running, you want to see Smith get taken out, you know.
Will Eubank, our director, he loves to play. Like, you get the sense that a film set is like a big sandbox, and we're just like here to try and have a bunch of fun. And he doesn't have like one way that he wants things to be. So we shot, I mean, kind of almost like alternative versions of just about everything that we did. And so there was like a lot of freedom to make it unique and to make it kind of specific and to carve things out for all the characters.
So we're gonna need a fan, like we're gonna fan to follow that, yeah?
Boyan Bazeli, our DP, is unreal. He's like an 8-year-old kid who somehow is just like the best cameraman in the world.
Boyan does a lot of slow creeping shots, or really, really wide shots. I think it would have been very easy to do this whole film right up super shaky in everyone's face, and it's not like that. There are these wonderful wide shots which are very calm, but it makes you feel uncalm because you're like, this is too, it's too gentle. Something bad's gonna happen to them.
The way that it's being shot and the way that the amazing set has been designed gives it an almost kind of dreamscape quality to it, where we start feeling going on through the movie like it almost starts to feel like a dream of some sorts. So that gives it kind of a visually really exciting component as well.
When we designed the sets were sort of designed with the idea that we're gonna put all the practical lighting in a set.
I would say 90% of the lights in this film, aside from being on the ocean floor, are practical lights.
Visually, film looks always better when the lights alone are in a scene. Designing the entire sequences with illumination in mind, that is basically part of the decor, part of the set, became essential. And to accomplish that, we had to virtually go into the lights that were not film lights. Generally, they are LED, RGB lights.
It's incredible to step onto a soundstage and you see the production design, which is breathtaking in and of itself, but then to see like what really happens when you have like top-notch production design and then you have top-notch cinematography and lighting, when that all gets wrapped together and then you see it on the monitor, it's really stunning.
Shooting those initial scenes were super intense. Our cameraman, Roberto DeAngelis, was just an unbelievable maestro with the camera. We had him in wheelchairs, zooming down hallways. We had him like running full bore with these tiny cameras that we had. All kinds of pyrotechnics happening, and pressure blowing out, and water stuff happening.
You know, the roofs are falling off and collapsing, and water's blasting up through the floor, and then at the last second, Will was like, "Oh, I wanted to run through in bare feet," and we were like, "What? Hang on a second, let's think this through." And so we came up with these little skin-colored little toe shoes, so it looks like she's running through in bare feet, but she's got some foot protection. And then, yeah, she hits that section right there and slides through. It's just as the door closes and a couple of people get blasted through this hallway, and yeah, it's non-stop action for the opening shot.
In the hallway we're in now, we had to create a blast hallway. We had water cannons and a whole array of chaos happening. Our heroes get behind the door as the doors are closing, and this hallway that we're in looks like it completely came apart.
Unlike doing a lot of green screen work, we did a lot of this kind of like black screen work where it's just the set is just kind of plunged into kind of darkness with specific lighting, you know, schemes. But for the most part, you're just out there on kind of a dark stage. And I actually kind of enjoyed those days because you don't really know what you're looking at and what's happening. And instead of like staring down a big bright green screen, you're actually just looking out into darkness.
Dry for Wet is interesting because we have the benefit of these massive stages here, and they just pumped it full of smoke. And when you have lights going through smoke, it creates a beam that looks just like a light going through water. And so I think a lot of people will watch this and go, "Oh, so much green screen." But really it's not. They're real sets, and those are real effects.
There's basically, what do we put in the camera here in New Orleans on set? And then there's, what does MPC do to that? MPC is our visual effects vendor. So here in New Orleans on set, what we put in the camera is something that has intensely controlled and heavily R&D'd lighting design, movement design, stunt rigging design, and then frame rate, speed.
So do you want to across? Clinger's got you on the ground.
Clingers.
As a stunt coordinator, you're usually looking to do things with tons of energy, tons of speed, and when we're trying to do a film underwater, yeah, I was like, wow, we're gonna have to slow everything down, and that's gonna be the challenge, how to slow down a lot of the action and replicate that authentically. So yeah, we went kind of full circle and did a lot of reference footage in a pool, and I had Kelly, who's our Nora stunt double. She's amazing. We had her down there 10 feet deep in the water and put her in a cable and started ratcheting her around the pool and getting different reference footage that we could then replicate on stage on Dry for Wet.
Action. 2, 1, action.
What they did technically was put us on wires in the suits to take a little bit of weight off of our shoulders so we could kind of walk with an implied buoyancy, like we sort of had this like suspended walk. And I was always like, there's no way this looks okay. We're pretending like we're like walking in water. And with a particular frame rate, he was able to sort of tie them together and make it look like we were genuinely submerged.
I met Mark Grainer, the stunt coordinator, and he rigged me up in a harness, and basically the idea is that when you're running underwater, you can't run like this. You have to run pitched forward. And it's such an interesting thing to do because you have to say your dialogue real time and you have to move your head real time, but you can't move your arms real time. You have to so you have to do this and then move your arms in slow motion, but your feet are out of shot and they want you to travel really fast, so your feet are going at the real speed.
We finally settled on, just doing some frame rate adjustments. So in the wide and medium shots, we would kind of go to like 30, 32 frames per second. And that just gave it a little bit of slowness, just so it felt like they were more underwater.
There's wire work that we have to do that's going to help us sort of look like we're underwater. But we did something that was Dry for Wet, but I had to be reminded, you got to move slower and kind of as if you have resistance, and smoother. You can't jerk around in the water. So that changes the nature of your sort of physical movement a little bit.
We did a little bit of wire work, but a lot of that was more just to get the effect of it looking like we were walking against some resistance, to kind of keep it looking like we were actually walking underwater.
We had a bunch of different systems in place. A lot of truss travelers on an I-beam that we could puppeteer, you know, people back and forth. In the testing phases of that, we saw that we could get some good up and down movement.
3, 2, 1, action!
All right, let's cut now.
Close your eyes, Preston. Kelly, good?
I'm good.
Yeah.
It kind of needed a little bit more of a bungee kind of feel, just a bit more floaty. So then we went to high lines and slack lines so that we could kind of lower those lines and a bit more organic kind of movements without, you know, being on a truss traveler where they're picked at the shoulders and they're just horizontal along the string. We wanted it just to be a little bit more floaty and travel them back and forth that way.
Mark Rayner was our stunt coordinator. He helped dream up a lot of this amazing cable stuff that we were doing to find ways to make it look like water was interacting with people. So sometimes when you see people blown back or throwing one way, where people are falling this way or the ground is shifting this way, to make it look like gravity is changing on people.
When you see Nora get, you know, dragged through the cave, we're doing that real time, and she's missing the cave edges by inches, you know, and all the sand's going flying, and it's got tons of energy. Nora's attached to the captain by this cable, and they get taken up to this set piece that's called a godlight, and they land on that, and then we unraveled them and had them on the truss traveler system where we could puppeteer them back and forth.
Can you see me? Mark Byers, our special effects supervisor, was building all these massive contraptions to help Mark Rayner out with some of the stunt stuff they were doing. The end scene is built on this huge gimbal that's totally flooded and water sloshing all over the place.
We took a gimbaling platform and fill it with a foot of water, and it rocks around as they know this ship is coming apart. And it has some cool pod doors that open and close and rock around on a gimbal.
Action! Who's there? Come on, you're up. You take this one.
It really kind of helps put Kristen and everybody else into sort of the actual environment. You know, given the amount of VFX things we're doing, it's nice to bring in some real good special effects to actually have the actors interact with what they're doing and keep it exciting and keep it as real as possible.
One of the challenging moments we realized was, how do we take somebody from a dry set into water and then cut to being in full dry for wet, where, you know, we're on dry sets and CG water everywhere.
We would have to do wet for wet. Usually in a space where you're submerging or emerging from the water.
The interaction of water with the actors was critical to be able to show the audience that we are actually going into water, and the interaction of water and the bubbles and the weight, and it's very claustrophobic as soon as you go underwater in one of these helmets.
The moon pool room itself was pretty triumphant feat just in terms of what we built. We had this big set with a huge hydraulic elevator that could actually lower into water, and then the steps that they would go down had water pouring down them. So it was like a tank in a tank, really. You know, you had to be careful because in the big suits it could be slippery. And then, yeah, there was water pouring down from the ceiling. There was so much water on this movie. For a dry for wet movie, it was far from dry. It was basically everyone was wet all the time.
We did shoot a couple days on some sound stages that were flooded, and so there was a day where I think we all spent about 9 hours or so submerged with small breaks here and there. But you don't really want to take too many breaks because you're in the water, you get out of it, and it gets really cold, and the suit gets even heavier when you step out of the water. So like we would get into the suits and they'd be like, do you want to just hang here? And I'd be like, no, I'm gonna go into the water actually where it's nice and warm and I can just like float there until we're ready to shoot something. But that was a pretty crazy day. We all had to take turns wearing an actual submersive suit, which is a version of these suits where the helmet is actually functional and they're actually pumping compressed air into it so that we could go underwater and get some shots. you want something that's elemental so that, you know, an audience can feel like they can reach out and touch it. And so we wanted to do as many water effects as we could.
We came up with a system of having 2 holding tanks in the parking lot that had 2 40-foot containers of water. And then what we'd do is anytime we were shooting a particular scene, we'd pull the water from the holding tanks in the parking lot, which had been heated and maintained. We'd put it into our set, and then when we were done shooting that, we'd pump it back to there and maintain it.
We keep about 42,000 gallons of warm, treated, fresh water to be pumped into any of the sets at any time. It was quite a process to engineer the water that sits outside in these tanks to be constantly conditioned and heated for our cast to be in. And we have 8-inch plumbing that plumbs the entire 3 stages of this whole facility. And we can pump water into any stage, use the water at any level, and pump it back into the tanks to be recirculated and put into another set at any time we're filming.
There is some stuff that takes place in a flooded kind of tunnel in this canal, and it's flooding and it's about up to our chests, and we reach a point where it's blocked and we can't go any further, and it's very claustrophobic. And those were my favorite days on the set because we were actually in this flooded set. It was dark. Unlike other sets, not everybody could get in the water with us. They had to kind of shoot from the sidelines and stuff. So it really, and in between takes, if they turned off the lights or anything, you suddenly were just in this kind of flooded tunnel.
Hey, yeah, how you holding up? Okay.
And those days made it so easy to do it because all you had to do was react to what's happening around you. And like that's what every actor I think really wants, is just an environment that feels real and that you can lose yourself in.
The thing about the bottom of the ocean is that it's complete darkness. And it's also extremely empty. You're not seeing a landscape full of coral reefs and fish, and because the pressure down there is so intense and the temperature is so intense that it's like being at the end of the earth. And so I think we really capture that in the film, that terror and that claustrophobic feeling. Despite being in a wide open space, you feel so trapped.
That's the thing about being in the water, is that, you know, our fears of the water and the unknown are so intense. It's like the second you're in the water, you're out of control. Like, you're no longer on top of the food chain. You're sort of at the whim of, you know, so many things. You can't breathe underwater. There's intense pressure. It's totally dark. I mean, it just gets crazier and crazier. And the deeper you go, the weirder it gets. A great horror film, to me, always ends up becoming a mirror to what that character is really going through.
The deep underwater as the threat by the environment, which is in scuba diving, it's kind of very important. You're always aware of the pressure, the cold, the murkiness, you know, the lack of visibility, and it was a big part of the story.
The greatest Lovecraftian fear of the unknown, what lies out there in the dark, and maybe man is pushing too far. To play with a lot of those themes, but to make them on such a personal, sort of perspective-driven movie through Kristen's character, Nora.
Will was very specific. He wanted it to be very claustrophobic and not inviting at all. He wanted, you know, everybody to be on their most uncomfortable kind of feelings watching this thing. And he wanted it to be realistic for a wide range of audiences.
The character of Kristen Stewart, it was very touching, and a very petite, strong woman character, and the fact that we were going to spend the entire movie with her. There was a lot of inside helmets, so a lot of claustrophobia.
It's been an interesting process trying to marry kind of the fantastical that already exists in the ocean with also the kind of the horror that exists in our minds, and kind of merging those things together and finding what these creatures, you know, look like and how they can be scary.
On a movie like this, really, we finished shooting and it was really just the beginning, because You know, there's so much with the visual effects and the creature design and making it all work together in a realistic fashion.
Even though we're underwater, we were referring a lot to space, you know, but space in terms of the unknown and in terms of you don't know what's out there. And which what I like in underwater is you can see at a certain distance, but not so much behind. And then you always have that fear of what is just behind.
The first thing we had to sort of get right was the look of the water and the density of it here and there, and you know, how much do we have here and how foggy is it over here.
We just did a lot of R&D on the particulates, just to make sure to develop our techniques onto the particulates, all the little floating elements that you can find into the water. There was going to be a lot of silt, a lot of contact, and a lot of swirl. So it's just a lot of fluidistic, you know, behavior of the environment around to sell it underwater.
Legacy built these great suits that just looked great. The only thing that we were planning to do digitally really was just to add glass to the helmets. They had glass for all the interior shots where they're just carrying around the helmet, you know, so those could just be as they are, just props. But when they got completely suited up and they were out in the open water environment, we would put digital glass in front of them.
The dry for wet process was exciting in the sense that it would place Kristen right in the water in a weird way.
The more the character is present in front of the lens, the protagonist is present close into our field of view, the more it becomes claustrophobic. Eventually we end up putting cameras so close to faces that are, I would say, inches away. It was a lens the Panavision made us. It's a 14 millimeter with a microfocus, and also was not distorting at all. So it feels like you are present inside the helmet.
And the glass come around.
So we could be over our shoulder in some way.
Come around, like we're just kind of featuring.
Going on set with Blair, Will, Boyan, it's always a great experience. And the mood that they set up, the set build, whether like kind of the sand patch, there was like a rock garden that we call, which was like some junk, you know, kind of piled up together that were built up that the actors would interact and then walk with. Some part of the station, the Kepler, all those platforms were outside. And the lighting of these was something that is extremely precious than in visual effects. Because it's extremely creative, it's extremely, you know, there's a lot of intention, there's a lot of mood into this. Now, you know, even though as well, you know, we're going to re-computer generate it's all based onto the principle photography.
We make it as dark as it would actually be, the lights really work, and then what we do is we fill in the space with a very thin amount of fog, essentially. And then later, using red trackers here and there, and then that volumetric reading that we have from the lights, we're able to then fill in water and actually have the suits pushing through all these simulations of actual water.
Hey guys, roll my way. Can you see me? I'm over here at the entrance. Emily, watch out!
We had shots that we were going to be fully computer generated, and then shots that we would have partial suit replacement, because sometimes for constraint they wouldn't be able to put the bottom or a part of the suit. So we had to reproduce the whole environment and the suit in a computer generated way. So then when it comes for the dry for wet, we end up replacing a lot, where we start going into the post-production process to have a better control of the shading of the water reaction, because the water has a certain property of the light, that how it absorbs the specular and how it bounces back on itself. With a controlled CG environment, we would have more parameters to play with and then make it more believable. So we use the old set and shoot to just kind of get that as a performance, and then matching lighting, and we just roto animate, so we just either reanimated all the characters as per their performance, and then we just re-rendered everything.
Warning, oxygen levels critical.
As soon as we get into sort of the creature realm and dealing with our other cast member, one of our crazy clingers as we call it, getting his movement right, getting a creature that is something horrifying like you might find down there, but also something that moves and and sort of sneaks around in a fashion that would be something of an underwater space. So dreaming up this stuff and getting the animation right and getting the keyframes right and getting the comping right, it's a never-ending story.
It's probably not a good time to ask, but is that a baby?
The baby clinger, they kind of run across an adolescent version of one of these creatures and shoot it, and then they are examining it later and they plop it down on this light table, and it just, the times I've seen it with the audience, it gets the appropriate response every time of just having this nasty looking thing hit the splat on the table. And you know, that worked out great. And that was a combination of, we had K&B build a practical version of it, which looked great and was really good, but in post we had some design changes to the creatures, so we ended up using that only in overs, over the clinger to the actors, and the rest of it, Image Engine did the digital version. That they just did a great job.
What are you doing?
I'm just looking for...
No! See?
I was able to dissect a baby clinger. Paul brings a clinger back, and I sort of touch it and fiddle with it, and it looks like a squid, but it's, of course, there's no light down here, so it's extremely pale, almost a tiny bit pinky, a tiny bit fleshy, and it's very, very soft and gooey, and it has this strange slime coming from it. And I open it up, and you can see it's just full of teeth inside.
It's like talons. I think this might be a new species.
Should we get to name it?
The first creatures you run across, we call them the clingers. And they're kind of like a slender humanoid, you know, thing that, you know, we just wanted to show just fleeting glimpses of. You didn't want to see too much. I mean, that was kind of our rule of thumb for the whole show, is as far as the creatures, definitely less is more. You know, don't show too much and it'll keep it creepier. If you don't show it, every single person in the audience is going to fill in the blanks in their own way of what's really scary to them. We started with designs part of the way there, and they were definitely based on kind of evolved versions of realistic things that you've seen, like an octopus, or like Behemoth at one point was kind of a long eel kind of thing. They definitely had monstrous qualities to them, but they were something that you could see like in obscure National Geographic.
We started with the octopus, the squid-like, with a lot of tentacles, a lot of kind of teeth onto it, so based onto some of the big giant octopus, but in a very meaner approach with the beak. And we went really far with that creature, but it was almost too common. It was not unusual enough to create that extra level of weirdness.
They definitely did evolve in a way, in a great way. We started ultra real, so we started in this space of more of a squid-like creature at the beginning, because we thought, okay, there's definitely squids down there. There's definitely things that we haven't seen, types of squids. But the more we got into it, we just realized it's not personal enough. It's very difficult to make a squid feel personal, like it's coming for you. A stunt person was crawling after Kristen's character, and it was just so creepy because you have this stunt person in all black just crawling after this other person, and it's like, oh, yeah, what is that? That's so horrifying in a way, you know? We kind of use that a little bit as an odd inspiration.
When Will started bringing the idea of a biped and what the clinger would be, because he was thinking, well, how would you feel if you're at the bottom of the ocean in the dark and you see a 3 meters very skinny tall man standing there and looking at you? And you would feel terrified.
Who's to say? Maybe we evolved from them, or there's some offshoot, or maybe there's some, we don't really know. We just find them down there. Very tall, very skinny, very fast at swimming, but also hyper intelligent.
There was an interesting sequence which would then later just introduce the clinger, and that was when the what we call the CK sequence, the captain kill. This is when the captain character is actually gonna die saving Nora.
It starts with they're trying to rescue one of the crew that gets pulled into a cave by one of these clingers.
I've got you. I've got you.
The clinger could be up here and then go, and then pull him. You know, if you just give us time to be able to like yank and then go down and get a purchase, so that when he's flying up, the
Ideally,
clinger
that
has
you get a
him.
two-shot with her scrambling to grab onto that cable in the same shot.
On the set, it was a real confined space. So they had built that part of the tunnel. We could just put the crane like right through to get in. And then we had Kristen Stewart and Vincent Cassel, my characters, fully suited, crawling into that confined space. Again, you could get the sweat is real.
He's alive.
So we had to control a lot the level of silt, because technically, if you start crawling into that space, it just fills up very quickly. So we had to just maintain enough gravity so it stays down, you know, but enough level so that sometimes we do gain the murkiness, which hide the reveal. And because they're all attached together, then we get into the pool.
It grabs onto Captain, who's tied to Nora, and it yanks them up in the air to this crazy-looking thing you see here, which is sort of an old, malfunctioning godlight. As it's swimming up, they kind of get caught almost like a fishing lure on the edge of this thing.
The captain is on the bottom and Nora's on top, kind of trying to get him loose, and then all of a sudden they hear on the other side of this light rig the creature.
It's very iconic. The Gola is that little platform of lights where then Nora is going to end up on top of it, and it swings. Because when they hit, you get that little swings. And then we maintain into the entire sequence the pendulum of the godlight.
I was hanging off a really sharp, cumbersome object, and I couldn't move. And I had a little green man running at me, saying that he was going to look like a clinger.
And it comes and makes its way around toward her.
This is probably one of the most revealing moments of the clinger.
No, I try to get the thing, can't do it. I think that there's such a striking, surprising thing about having something look like the things of our nightmares come out of the ocean, that it's the first taste of what we've tapped into.
The idea would still be that the clinger is a parasite of a bigger one. There is that scene when she comes into this vent, and then we see her curtains of limbs. And then this is where we find out that it's not just one that they had that she actually killed earlier. There is hundreds of them. And obviously they're on a vent where they have to go through. And then they're gonna just walk through, and then one of the clinger just wakes up. And the whole idea of this that Will wanted is that the clinger would swallow her.
One of the ways that the clinger dispatches its victims is it in this case it gets a hold of Nora and kind of has her wrapped up and hanging onto her.
To maintain the animalistic aspect of the clinger, it was something where it's almost like when the squirrel wants to crack a nut and then kind of have that observation of just, how do I get in? You know, what part am I going to just go first with? And that's what the clinger first, it's like cat and mouse. He's playing around with her. So it's based on some performance where we had Kelly, which was a Kristen stunt performer, on wires with the suit, you know. So everything was kind of performed, so we can have the framing, we had the photography, we had it was very impressive how heavy those suits are. And then the kind of swivel and hole, we kept all this. We just matched the whole performance, and then we just spatially just move slightly in space, so we can just adapt to the creature.
And then it just puts its mouth over her head and then just starts to work its way down over her and just swallow her whole.
Which is very much like snake when they swallow their prey. And then you can actually see the whole sack progressing onto her.
And it's kind of in this hands and knees position, and she's vertical, standing up, but it's completely over her. And then you cut inside, and she's struggling in the interior of the clinger.
And you see those light scattering through the flesh, you know, as it goes down. And then she managed to grab the flare gun and shoot herself through and torn the clinger apart. really nice sequence. I mean, in the horror sequence, of course, it's not for everyone, but it's a very pleasing in visual effects as well.
We never really explained it. We left it a little open-ended. You don't know if they're kind of hatching out of it or if they're kind of embedded like ticks or something nasty, but later on you find out that what they're embedded in is the big creature, which we call Behemoth.
The Behemoth went through some design changes as well.
Will was describing as an ancient god-like creature, something that is very, very strong, very, very posed, you know, kind of extremely powerful looking, very, you know, shape, skull, you know, very sinister.
Behemoth became this old god kind of thing, humanoid torso with like a lot of tentacles and stuff.
As we were getting darker and darker and the film was almost becoming even a little more fairy tale-esque in some fashion, our design just started to lean as we're like building up these animations and things. He started to lean further and further away from what was probably written as a large, scary fish. It became more of a being. In a way, it mirrors more of what the characters are truly dealing with in their hearts and in their beings. The Behemoth at the end is a very personal, sort of sentient creature. With the creatures, it's pretty fun, like just going down that rabbit hole of like when you hear something that's terrifying, how would this sound really underwater? And how do we kind of make it speak, you know? Like what sounds are it making to talk to other ones? And with our sound designers, like we just got to create such an arsenal of terrifying sounds. And then the big guy, he's obviously got such a big voice that maybe the first time you hear him, you're not even realizing you're hearing him.
What's always interesting in visual effects, obviously we add to it, we add to the visual, and then the sound designer is going to add to it. You know, so it's always the final product is always a pile of multiple talents that work on, you know, on the same subject, but each one of them are going to add, you know, their own take on it.
On this movie, we're basically taking like every one of your fears and trying to push it. So whether it's like claustrophobic spaces or underwater stretches that are just pitch black and you're, you know, all you have is your flashlight and this alien landscape, running out of air, running out of oxygen, different creatures and things. Hopefully it just leaves people thrilled and excited for more.